Okay, well, hello and welcome. And following on from last week's excellent tech talk by Keith Oakley on the quiet craft, tonight I'd like to share some of my experiences in the last few years of hovercrafting in the Northwest. Okay, so I'd like to introduce myself first. I'm Rob Alker. My first interest in hovercraft was in 1981, aged 11. Now, I grew up on a farm, so we always had access to a workshop. And I decided I'd build a hovercraft. I don't know why. I think maybe I'd seen something on the television, one of these school type challenges that was done at the time. Our school didn't do one, so I decided I want to build a hovercraft. I used some parts from an old Land Rover, a derelict combine harvester, an industrial BSA engine, and welded this thing together. It wasn't successful, but the interest didn't go away at all. Fast forward 30 odd years or so, and I decided I'd write off to the club and see what was going on in my local area. Well, I got a fantastic reply back from the Reverend Granville Spedding, who I'm very glad to say is our secretary at the local Northwest branch. Again, every one of you will know Granville for sure. And Granville wrote back an excellent welcome letter with lots of information and so on. At the time, I didn't join the club. Situation didn't quite suit. But fast forward a few more years, and as you do, mooching about on eBay, I kept looking to see what was available. And I found this little snapper that had spent its life, or a lot of its life, at one of these events companies. It had ended its life there and it was lying derelict. There was lots of work to fix it up. I rebuilt the engine, some fiberglass bodywork, a new skirt, full rewire, and so on. And it didn't cost me a fortune, and I didn't need to put a fortune in. But I decided I needed a little bit of help and support, so I decided at this point to join the club. Well, very quickly, some friends reached out to me and said, "Hey, why don't you come up to the Ulverston area? We're going out hovercrafting." Now, at this point, I was rather worried that my little snapper might not be up to the job. So far, I'd just taken it around some fields and so on, and I was thinking, am I going to be good enough? Is my craft going to be able to keep up? Is it going to be up to the standard of everybody else's? And I was really welcomed by the guys up there, and I've got to say a big thanks at this point to my very good friend Dave Hitchin and Tony Shaw as well, who were so welcoming with so much advice. Took my craft up there and we had a fantastic day out, and I was very pleased how it was able to perform. As I say there, I've done over 1,000 miles in that little craft and introduced lots of friends and family to hovercraft cruising with this little snapper. And even my wife Rachel, who initially was rather skeptical about the whole concept of hovercrafting, I've got to say, really loves it and really enjoys it, but a little bit more of that later on. This craft has now passed on to a new home. Now we can see here a little clip of the mighty snapper overtaking Mr. Shaw out on the waters of Morecambe Bay. Didn't happen very often, but we had a fantastic day cruising out there nonetheless. So what kind of craft do people generally take out hovercraft cruising? Well, the first thing I want to say again is you don't have to spend a fortune. There's all sorts of makes and models. Some people will buy a new craft ready to go out the box, and that's absolutely fantastic. Some people will buy older craft like I've done and put some work in to make sure they're up to the necessary standard, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. They're mostly, as I'm sure you know, they're mostly 4-strokes, normally industrial engine. Briggs and Stratton engines are very common, as we know, big block in the larger craft, the so-called small block in the smaller craft like my Snapper was. In general terms, old racers don't particularly make good cruising craft for varying reasons, not just the fact they tend to be 2-strokes. There's nothing wrong with the 2-stroke, but they tend to suffer a little bit from the wet and so on, especially the salt water we see out in the type of cruising that we do. But also you don't always have the necessary freeboard, the height above water to the top deck of the hull, maybe not the same kind of buoyancy and so on that we would see typically with a cruising craft. So select your weapon carefully. But there's all sorts of craft that we can see. Some big, some small. The bigger ones often have motorbike engines. BMW engines are popular, 3-cylinder, 4-cylinder BMWs. And there's all sorts of makes and models that we can see here. Some are highly modified, some are straight as purchased from the manufacturer or whoever has made it. There's lots of things to tinker with a hovercraft. Last week we enjoyed the excellent talk by Keith where he's done a phenomenal amount of work on his many craft, focusing on keeping them quiet, which is an important thing as well. So you can tinker with them as much as you like, or you can buy straight off the shelf, as some people prefer to do as well. Now back to something close to our home here. Well, I started off with that little red Snapper, and within a couple of years we had 5 hovercraft. Not by intention, it's just how these things happen. You see these things on eBay. This particular one we're looking at here, a friend, again, Mr. Hitchin, got in touch and said, hey, I've heard of this craft locally. It's been lying derelict in a back street in Ulverston for over 10 years. The guys got in touch, seeing if I want to buy it. I don't, maybe you do. So I shot up there, had a look at this thing, and we did a deal. Now, it had been sitting literally outside for 10 years, so it had suffered quite a lot of degradation. I think it had come straight off the water, straight into this back alleyway, and sat there forever. So a lot of the steel parts on it had gone very rusty. A lot of the alloy parts had gone very furry. The skirt, a lot of UV degradation and so on. So I mentioned before my wife Rachel, who very much enjoys hovercrafting. She's also into the racing, or hoping to get into the racing side of it. That's another story for another video perhaps. But we decided I've got another Marlin as well. You'll see that in a minute. And we decided it would be fantastic for Rachel to have this Marlin. Now, my initial thoughts were, well, let's just clean the thing up and get it going. Rachel's got a far better aesthetic eye than I have, and she decided, no, let's do it right, especially while we're in these strange days of lockdown, and I hope you're all well. Let's go right through this craft, and I've got to say she made the right decision. She's done most of the work on this thing herself. We can see it in the middle picture there. It's in our garage, in our workshop there, just after we've sprayed it. Lots of the other components we can see there are ready to go. So the message here really is take your time. There's an awful lot of support out there if you don't know what to do, and you don't have to spend a fortune. Hovercraft cruising can be really, really accessible to everybody, and we've learned an awful lot of skills along the way in doing this. So how do you get them around? Well, an important thing is that it's easy. If it's a real faff to load your hovercraft up, to move it around, then you're less likely to decide to go out, especially on the spur of the moment. So I've made a few of these little trailers, simple, lightweight trailer, really easy to load and unload your craft. And I've made some of these for friends and other people as well. So make sure that you've got a good trailer. You're going to tow this thing up and down the roads. Make sure it's safe. Make sure it'll do the job properly, but make sure it's easy to use, so you're more likely to decide to go out on your craft. Maintenance and repair is something that's inevitable with this kind of pastime. Skirt segments are a good example here. Now you can, I'm sure, for whatever kind of craft you've got, you can buy these things off the shelf if you like, but some people, ourselves included, decided, well, we're going to have a go at making these, and it's not so difficult once you get the idea. You can see there, set out on the kitchen table, is a small plywood template of the shape of the skirt segment pieces. And once you've got the hang of it with the sewing machine, you can sew these things together. And I've done this for a couple of craft now, and we'll be doing it on that black marlin that you saw in the spray booth there. The material's readily available for cruising. We use a 6-ounce neoprene coated nylon, which is pretty much the standard material people tend to use for cruising. Racing can be a little bit lighter, and some people, if they want a bit more durability, maybe they're doing a lot of off-water type work, maybe in fields and so on a bit more, you can go for a heavier material if you want. Segments do wear, but not too badly. It's usually the ones at the back. It'll wear the corners off those, but they can be repaired as well. It's always a good idea to carry a few spare segments with you, just in case you catch a rock or something and rip one off. And this is a typical thing you might do during your maintenance and repair. There's lots of other maintenance to do, the same with any other kind of mechanical vehicle. But maybe one thing to mention, especially the coastal cruising that we do, wash the craft down. You're usually out there in salt water, which is very aggressive. So wash your craft down can be one of the best maintenance jobs that you can do. Now, reliability is everything. All you're thinking when you're out there, think back to that little video of me overtaking Tony out in the water. That was lovely, flat, calm water. Sometimes it's a little bit heavier seas than that. And believe me, I'm a novice in this, but when things are starting to get a bit choppy out there, all that's in my mind is, please keep going, please keep going, please keep going. And touch wood, so far, my craft have been pretty reliable. And I put that down to, excuse me, I put that down to the work I put into the wiring. Many of the breakdowns I've seen are often due to poor wiring. And as I say, wiring like you can see there, it doesn't end well like that. And one of my craft came literally with that wire in the ignition system. So it isn't going to end well. Do all you can to make your craft the most reliable it can be. Keep your wiring simple. Separate the essential circuits. Don't have everything fed off the back of the ignition switch, for example, all your chart plotters and beacons and everything else. Separate these circuits, so even if your beacon stops working or your flashing lights don't work or your chart plotter stops, the engine keeps going. That is critical. Solder everything, plenty of silicone grease, WD-40 or ACF50, that kind of thing, to keep the water out of there. Scotch locks and twisted wires that we see in this picture, those pre-insulated terminals, are a recipe for disaster. But there's always little jobs to do. We can see here a little bit of a repair going on. Mr. Tony Shaw with his head up the back of Nick Rushby's famous Punisher craft there. An excellent craft, I have to say. A very visually striking machine as well. Now, I mention sometimes we can be out on the water, and safety has got to be absolutely paramount. And in my brief experience, and I am no mariner, and I take my hat off to my friends and colleagues who are more experienced, and I listen to everything that those guys say. But one thing that struck me is when you're on the water, when you're out at sea or in rivers or whatever, it can go from everything's fantastic to very bad very quickly. Respect the sea and do everything you can to prevent problems happening in the first place. Being with someone with good local knowledge plus a reliable craft and equipment are probably your best safeguards. Anything else is there to get you out of trouble. It's best not to get into trouble in the first place. But taking sensible precautions as well is really important. Depending where you are in the world or which kind of area you're in, on a river, in marinas, out at sea or whatever, there's different regulations that you'll need, and I'm not going to go into the details of navigation regulations and so on. Many of you are far more experienced and better placed to comment on that. But we do need a flashing beacon. I've seen some really feeble, weak beacons on some people's hovercrafts that you really do have to question, is that thing turned on or not? Buy yourself a good beacon. The one you can see in the picture on the left there, not ridiculously expensive, bought online from a good quality retailer in the UK, very high intensity LED beacon. Some other things that we would always take. You can see in the picture a VHF radio there, just a simple handheld set like this. It's really important, as if you're going any distance away from shore at all, someone should have a VHF radio and know how to use it and know who to contact and everything about it. We'll speak a little bit more about training and so on later on. Also in the picture you can see a pair of Bluetooth headsets. Now these I made up, copied from a design of a friend. Really cheap and simple. They're just a pair of decent quality ear defenders and some motorbike intercom units connected in these. Not expensive. I think I put that pair together for about £70, something like that. And not only is it a safety thing, it's really nice to be able to chat with other guys who are out on the cruise. You can, of course, warn each other of any hazards or dangers ahead, but it's nice to be able to chat as well, to say, hey, look at that up here, did you see that over there? It's great. Probably one of the greatest safeguards though is don't go out alone. We never ever would go out on our own, and we've proved this time and time again. A buddy system, being there with someone. It could only be a small issue that you can fix yourselves while you're out there, but if you're out alone it could leave you in more difficulty, so always go out with someone. And it goes without saying, on any water, anywhere, irrespective of the depth, wear a life jacket or buoyancy aid, the appropriate thing, without fail. But the best safety is don't get into trouble in the first place. But occasionally accidents do happen, and a minor mishap like we see here, and I hope Joe forgives me for using this picture here, it really was a very minor incident. There was no problems at all here. We were out on the estuary mud at Liverpool. If we were doing 5 miles an hour, I'd be surprised. A very flat, shiny surface. And Joe spotted the gully here, but unfortunately the surface was so slick, just slithered into it. He spun round, but just slithered into it at really low speed. There was no problems at all. We weren't able just to pull him out using ropes and lines and that. He's quite well in there. It was fairly deep, that gully. We just had to sit there and wait it out. Unfortunately, a concerned citizen on the shore, rather than shouting over and saying, hey, you all right, lads? He chose to phone the police, the Coast Guard, the fire brigade, and also, very kindly of him, the national newspapers. We waited probably an hour and a half or so. The tide came in and Joe floated out of there, no problems at all. But it did manage to make the national papers in that evening. And he's from this day on known as the Unknown Man. So, when do we go out cruising? Well, I've got to say, there is no cruising season. We've been out all year round And some of the best times we've had have been on a nice fresh winter's day, but make sure you're wrapped up warm, which goes without saying. There's organised cruises in the club calendar, as I'm sure you're aware, but also, especially in the Northwest, we have an awful lot of ad hoc cruises. We're a fairly tight, small community. There are WhatsApp groups, friends and so on are in touch all the time, and we keep an eye on the weather and the tides, and we'll decide, hey, come on, let's go. And those are sometimes some of the best times that we have out there. Sometimes it's t-shirt weather, and sometimes it's full wrapped up Arctic gear. Now, most of our cruising is done in tidal areas, and so we need to know the tide times and the tide heights, and there's lots of useful information out there. There's lots of apps that you can download for free, which can be very, very handy. Wind's an important thing. The calmer, the better. Probably if it gets to 20, 25 miles an hour, whatever that is in knots, again, I'm no mariner, that's probably enough. We don't want it any windier than that. And I just want to show here the how the tides can come in. I took this sitting in my craft. We'd stopped just for a bit of a chat, and I'm sitting there. This is up in Morecambe Bay, and you can see the tide creeping in towards us there. But sometimes the water can come in an awful lot faster than that. Morecambe Bay especially is and I'll show you a little bit more about it in a minute, but it's a very large, generally flat area, and it's a very dangerous place for the unaware. Again, as I said earlier in the safety slide, local knowledge is absolutely everything. One of our group had occasion a couple of years ago. He was out in his craft. In fact, he was on his way back, and the tide was coming in, and he spotted some people way out from shore, probably 2 or 3 miles out. And he's thinking, these guys shouldn't be out there. Went over to them, and it was two young ladies, not from the local area, walking out towards the sea. And Dave said, what are you doing? You know the tide's coming in. Oh, what do you mean? We thought we'd just go out along this beach and find the sea. Well, little did they know they were already cut off. Dave gave them a lift back to shore and averted what could have been a tragedy. It might look flat out there, but it isn't. And the water can be building up behind a ridge and suddenly rush back in, and it can come in pretty quick. I haven't included a slide, but look up online the Arnside tidal bore, and you'll see how fast the water can come in. You couldn't outrun it. In your craft, you're quite safe. You'll hover away, but it's just one to be aware of. Quicksand as well out there, so it's a dangerous place, but an ideal place to be out in your hovercraft. So launching, we tend to launch at low tide, just so we launch out onto the sand. It's not essential, but it gives us a chance to form up into a group and fix anything if anything needs to go wrong there. And I just wanted to include that little video of Mr. Chris Clark reversing his Vortex Sirocco as we launch from the far side of the Mersey estuary there. So like I say, we tend to launch at low tide, but that's not essential. One thing to be aware of, mind, is if you're going to be out for any length of time, make sure you can get back to where you need to. I've had some friends tell me tales of they've launched when there's been water there, and then when they've got back, they've not been able to get back up wherever it is they've launched from, because the water's all disappeared, and they could be facing a very steep incline to get out of the water. Cruising in the tidal areas where we go in the northwest can take us to places that you just couldn't see via any other way. Mud banks, wrecks, there's all sorts of things to see, and we'll look at that in a minute. But one thing that struck me, one of the great joys I've found from hovercrafting, you can be out in a place and you almost think, well, I shouldn't be allowed to be here. You know, there's mud, there's water, there's, you know, you can't see it by boat. You couldn't get there with a quad bike or whatever. It really is absolutely delightful. There's always something great to see. Here we can see a seal lounging on one of the marker buoys in the Walney Channel up near Barrow. There's always lots of life, wildlife out there to see. Flocks of birds, fish, seals, as we can see here. It really is wonderful. Morecambe Bay, famous for shellfish as well. Sometimes we'll meet up with some of the guys, the licensed shellfish cockle pickers and these kind of guys, and we'll stop and chat and so on. And if you sit there with your craft running, the action, the vibrations from the craft on the sand can often bring these cockles and mussels and things to the surface. There's all manner of other things that you can come across out there. And this is probably proof why a hovercraft really is the only suitable vehicle to be out in the middle of such areas with. A couple of examples here of cars that didn't make it. And there's quite a few of these out there. There's other things that we've seen that you just don't see. And here we found exposed from the sand part of, it's an old railway line system from the 19th century. This was just out from the Ulverston area. And this was a system of iron ore transport, which was part of the local industry there from to and from Ulverston. And that stone wall that we can see the train tracks sitting on there, I'm told that's about a 10-foot high embankment. This part of the bay is now all silted up. And it was really quite special to find this, because we're told that this only appears every 20 to 30 years, depending on how the sands are shifting. So that was something really special to see there. Here's another interesting thing that Tony Shaw guided us to. Very familiar with this. It's a little shipwreck, the wreck of the Anastasia, and it was lost on Christmas Day in 1946, just north of Walney Island. No loss of life, thankfully, but it's quite a way offshore. And the authorities were keen to discourage people from walking out to see it. It's a fairly long way off, and a number of people have had to be rescued because they get cut off by the tide and so on. So they actually got the RAF to bomb it, to try and blast it into little pieces, but they only managed to break it into 2 pieces, and it made it probably even more interesting to go and look at. But it's perfectly safe to go and see it by hover, and it's a great thing to go and see. Photo opportunities abound when you're out on your hovercraft. Again, all credit to Nick for taking this beautiful picture here, showing the reflection on the sand, myself and Dave Hitchin there. The brilliant photo opportunities, and it'd be nice if we can share these among ourselves a little bit more widely. So I'd encourage you to send your pictures in to us in the club. Send them into cruising@hovercraft.org.uk. I'll put that address at the end so we can write it down. But there really are some breathtaking views to be seen out there. So where do we go? Well, in the northwest, it's mostly in 2 main areas. In the Liverpool and the Mersey estuary area, and then up in the Morecambe Bay area to the north side of Morecambe Bay, usually Ulverston, Barrow, this kind of area. Each has got its own attractions, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. Now, when I first got my craft, I wasn't sure, and this is one of the first questions many people ask, well, where can I go with this thing? And I wasn't really sure, and probably like many people, it's like, oh, well, I'll just go down to the local beach. I'm relatively close to Southport, Ainsdale, that kind of thing. But some of these are restricted in terms of where you can launch and so on. Without getting into any legislation and so on, in the UK we do have the public right of navigation, which means unless you're in a particularly restricted area, maybe an SSI or a military area and so on, you have the right to navigate coastal waters up to the high tide mark. Now, a curiosity of hovercrafting is you can go to the high tide mark when there isn't any water there. The legislation was probably intended to refer to boats, but with a hovercraft you can go to the high tide line when there isn't any water there. So that gives you somewhere to go. The difficulty is getting from the shore to the high tide line. You have to cross a beach or someone's land and so on. So you don't necessarily have a right to launch. So as a club, we work with different areas to make sure we can open up new launch sites and so on. I won't go into that too much now, but I see that's something that we can work on more, to get more and more launch places where we can go, to get them mapped again. I know there's been maps and so on, but these things probably want refreshing. And also, as a club, we can approach different people, different organizations, to give a good reason why it should be okay for us to go and show our responsibility. We've got a cruising code of conduct as well, which you can find on the club website, reflecting wildlife, beach buzzing, don't annoy people, keep the noise down and so on. All the sensible things that are likely to enable us to open up our pastime rather than have it more restricted and so on. So let's look at some of the areas where we go a little bit. So I've spoken about Morecambe Bay. Well, where is it? Well, it's in northwest England, just south of the Lake District. It's an area of about 120 square miles, and it really is hover heaven. It's a massive area to explore. There's plenty of things to see. There's lots of places to launch. There's a number of public slipways right on the water there that you can use. So it really is an easy and fantastic place to go. We often enjoy the very kind facilities offered by the Ulverston, let me say that again, the Ulverston Inshore Rescue, and we can't express enough the gratitude to these guys, but also what an admirable job these volunteers do to keep everybody safe. And it's a great organisation that we really all ought to support. That's Ulverston Inshore Rescue. Look that up. But look at the view there. It really could be said to be the Ulverston Riviera. Taken on a very nice day when the rain's coming in sideways, it's just as nice. There's lots of areas to go and see. And here, a bit of an evening shot of the fabulous Peel Island. It's a particular attraction, this. It's got a castle, a couple of houses on there, which used to be, again in times gone by, the pilots' houses, where the pilots would row out to incoming ships to guide them in safely. And also there is the fabulous Ship Inn pub on the island there. Now Peel Island can only be accessed by small boat or hovercraft. The pub's open throughout the spring, summer and some of the autumn, closed over the winter. But we were made welcome there over the Christmas period. On a couple of occasions now we've pulled up there just to stop on the island and been welcomed into the pub for a mince pie and a bite to eat on a cold day. So thanks to those guys as well. If you can make it up there, it's definitely a place to go. Again, photo opportunities abound. Tony and Dave planning where we should go next when we're out there. Here's another shot of Peel Island, and this is one of the 10 islands of Barrow. And we were thinking we'll plan a trip when we have a more organised cruise up there with more people who maybe aren't familiar with the local area, and maybe we can visit all 10 islands. I don't know them all by name. Tony there is the local knowledge on this, but there's a number of islands up there: Walney Island, Peel Island, Sheep Island, Felney Island, and so on. See if you can look up the rest, and then you'll know where we're planning to go. There's lots of slipways there, some better than others, and we used a small narrow slip one time. Again, this was between Christmas and New Year, and just to pull up on the shore there to go and visit a local calf. It's sometimes great to try and squeeze every moment out of the day, and that can give us some fantastic photo opportunities. This was on our way back one evening last year. One of the other areas that we go, different again, is the Mersey estuary. Now we can see here, again in the northwest of England, the Mersey, obviously Liverpool being the main city on the Mersey there, but you can see how that really opens up quite wide inland there, and that gives us a massive area as well to hover in. Great conditions, very varied conditions, from wide open sandbanks to mogully areas, a lot of mud flats, there's many channels and so on. Quite a safe area to go, but again, keep your wits about you. There's some very slippy mud, as you saw in an earlier slide. There's lots of space and lots to see, and there's also fairly little boat traffic once you are inland of upstream of Liverpool itself. Here we tend to launch from the facilities of Liverpool Sailing Club. A number of us are actually members of the club, so we can use the facilities all year round. And Liverpool Sailing Club hosts two of the more formal events throughout the year that you'll see in the cruising calendar, where non-Sailing Club members are invited to join us, and we've had some fantastic weekend events from here. Look up the Sailing Club. It's a great organisation. Again, very reasonable membership rates, and for those who live a bit further away, there's some discounted rates to join. Great place to launch from, and great facilities. Working with the Sailing Club actually works really well, because we tend to want to go out on our hovercraft when there's no water, or we launch at low water, so we don't tend to conflict with the boating guys very much at all. The Sailing Club offers some great training courses as well on VHF, safety courses, first aid, powerboat courses, and so on. So there's lots of resources to be had as well, not just for Sailing Club members. You can join courses as well. So where do we go from there? So travel west, and you're soon passing through the heart of Liverpool itself and out towards the Irish Sea. Something just popped up there. And there's some fantastic places to visit along the North Wirral coastline, New Brighton, and so on. One of the cruises last year, we went up that way. There's some beautiful beaches up there, and it's very interesting traveling through the heart of Liverpool on your hovercraft as well. Travel east, and there's some fantastic scenery as well, varying from wide open tidal sandbanks, mud flats, and traveling on to the Runcorn bridges as we carry on. Here's a shot, the old Runcorn Railway Bridge, and we carry on through there, and there's a very convenient little embankment there that we can pull up, and there's a pub just underneath the Runcorn Bridge there, so we took opportunity to stop for some refreshments there. You do get a few funny looks in the pub mind when you pull up off the mud and tread a bit of mud into the pub, but they're generally pretty welcoming as well. Carrying on inland, and we'll see the amazing new Mersey Gateway Bridge, recently finished and opened a couple of years ago at a cost of £600 million. Hence it's a toll bridge now. On the way back, there's all sorts of other things to see, the Hale Lighthouse being one of these things. The Liverpool Sailing Club is literally at the end of the runway, the John Lennon Airport, Liverpool Airport runway. We can see an EasyJet plane coming into land there, but I know which I'd rather be on and it would be the hovercraft rather than an EasyJet plane. So in terms of places to go, I don't think we can ever run out of different places to see, even just in those two venues on the Mersey and in Morecambe Bay. But it's always nice to break new ground, and we look forward to visiting new areas. Further north, there's the Solway Firth area offering some fantastic scenery and opportunities for hovering. I know I've seen some online videos of folks hovering up there, and I know a couple of the other club members have been up there doing some other hovercraft activities. But that would be a brilliant place to go and explore. One of our newer club members lives up that way, so we look forward to joining him up there. But one thing that the club can bring, the organisation, I think we can as I mentioned before, we can approach as a collective, responsible group to break new ground. So who cruises? Well, one thing I have to say is many of the people that I've met through hovercrafting aren't necessarily members of the club, and here's where we've got a job to do, I think, as club members. Is really build the value in the club and make it the thing to do to join. But more on that another time. I mean, for me, I'm ever grateful to those folks who reached out to me to encourage me to join, and are so welcoming. I have to say, it really is a fabulous community there, and it's a great way to involve friends and family. My son standing there in the foreground as well. I mentioned earlier I went from one craft and we had 5 at one time, and my wife Rachel, she's very excited to be involved in hovercrafting, which is just fabulous. We can treat this as a family activity, as so many people do. It's a great thing to be able to do. There's also potential for a lot of crossover between the hovercraft racing community and the cruising community, whether that's an individual doing both activities, as we intend to do in the fullness of time, or just cruising folks getting involved at racing, helping out, marshalling, vehicle recovery and organisation and so on, or whether it's racing guys coming along to some of the cruises, maybe just for the social in the evening, or maybe to go out for a ride on a craft or get their own craft or whatever. So it's been a great way to open up opportunities. So come and join us. Get in touch if you're not really sure of how to do that, or you're not really sure of how to go about getting a craft, or maybe which to choose, maybe what to avoid, what kind of things you need to do. But as I say, I think it's a very accessible pastime. It doesn't need to cost a fortune. So come and join us. It'd be great. Great to see us expand the membership of the club. And again, some thanks and acknowledgements to all those that make it possible. And I'll repeat some again before. So thanks to the Ulverston Inshore Rescue Team, in particular, Bruce Chataway and his team up there, and everyone at the Liverpool Sailing Club as well. So get in touch and come and join us. Thanks for watching.